Houston year two in the new look Big 12. What are the Cougars going to pull off? Let's talk about that with Parker Ainsworth. He is at P Ainsworth 512 on X, formerly known as Twitter, host of Locked On Cougars here at the network. Parker, Willie Fritz comes into the fold, comes over from Tulane where he had a lot of success. It was not a great first year in the Big 12 for Houston. FanDuel is not particularly high on the Cougars. Let's talk about the new coach though, Willie Fritz. How is he being received down there in Houston?
Very well. Energy is up. It is play through the echo of the whistle, and it's on like coaches' t-shirts as they're walking around. Effort and energy are big demands. It's not quite as I know people don't think of Dana Holgorsen as a cerebral kind of guy, maybe. There's a lot more focus on the effort than just like being highfalutin in your offense. People are really the players themselves are speaking very highly of the changes, right? They're not necessarily like talking bad about the previous institution, but the changes and the energy and upbeat tempo, a lot of attention to detail, no music at practice, that kind of stuff. I mean, just a very different vibe across the board. I had one guy, I'm not going to throw his name out there because I don't want to like get him in trouble, but that played on the team last year is looking to get drafted. Maybe we'll see if he does or not this spring. And he was like, "Man, I kind of wish I had another year." He was like just talking to guys like he's that enthusiastic about it. So I think those are all good signs. Obviously, I'm not practicing every day. I'm not living it, but I think those are all good signs.
Yeah, so Willie Fritz had a great run at Tulane, double-digit wins each of the last couple of years, the Cotton Bowl victory over USC a couple of seasons ago. This is, and I feel obliged, as always here at Locked On College Football, to remind you of where everyone is in terms of their conference affiliation. It can be confusing. This is a Big 12 Houston Cougars. This is a Big 12 Houston Cougars team. Without Texas and Oklahoma, I think the league gets lighter. It is certainly more manageable than the Big Ten or the SEC, but I think has greater depth than, say, the ACC. Where do you see Houston fitting into the mix long term with Willie Fritz at the helm? Where can they get to?
The big thing for Houston is keeping kids home because everyone in the Big 12 is recruiting the city of Houston, right? And so I think in the long term, you're looking at a program that has a lot of tools for success right there in the backyard. Obviously SEC schools are abundant or in the area. You got A&M, Texas, LSU, and Oklahoma, all relatively short drives. But Houston itself being a Power 5 program in the city, keeping kids that are, from Klein Kane or from Shadow Creek or different like big time programs, obviously North Shore being the biggest in the area, I think projects this program being a big time program. And I think that's frankly why they kind of gave Dana the boot. His 2024 recruiting class at the time was just 8 commits in the entire high school class. And he had kind of like out loud said on a radio show that, they were just kind of going to let it be that and just kind of keep moving on to the next thing. And I don't think administration took too kindly to the idea of like, hey, all of the resources for one of the greatest cities in all of high school football are right in your backyard. You can't be done, right? And so I take that to mean that I think that the expectation is that it might not be in year 1 or 2 of Willie Fritz, but that this thing is going to get in the right direction because if they were okay with status quo, bottom third of the conference, they would have just kept the old guy, right? I mean, he had a big buyout and everything.
So as Houston goes into their second year in the Big 12, but their first with Willie Fritz at the helm, in spring football, I presume, has gotten underway down there in Houston. What are kind of the big storylines right now coming out of the Cougars football program?
Big deal is going to be Willie Fritz is a defensive guy. He brings in Kevin Barbay, who was recently stopped at Mississippi State. But what is the offense going to look like with year 2 of Donovan Smith as a full-time starter? Frank, there's some question. Is he going to be a full-time starter? And what does that look like for Houston taking the snaps? Donovan Smith is 6'5", 245, has shown some arm talent at different points, had some very strong games. When he was at Texas Tech before he transferred to Houston, he was kind of a dual threat running over linebackers kind of sized guy. And at Houston, they didn't use much in those kind of situations. And there's kind of some assumption that Willie Fritz and the tough-nosed kind of guy he is may bring some of that back, right? And frankly, if they don't, they also went and got a transfer quarterback named Zion Chris from Louisiana. I always want to say Louisiana Lafayette, by the way. It's Louisiana now, though. He is like your electric 4.4 speed type of quarterback. And so he's maybe a younger guy, more of a project in his arm and those kinds of things. But I think there's a chance you see both guys on the field, and how do they look next fall? I think that's the big question for fans is, all right, we think of Houston as Greg Ward, Case Keenum, these electric offenses. What is that going to look like in the Big 12 next fall?
So as the Cougars look at their schedule, the win totals I mentioned earlier, not very high, according to our friends at FanDuel. It's sitting at 4.5. Is there anything that you would see this spring that would make you think, hey, this could be a bowl team in 2024? What are those sorts of big markers? What are the big priorities for Houston?
Well, I will say, and I know I just talked about quarterback, so maybe this sounds somewhat hypocritical, that when you saw Fritz have success at Tulane, they ran the football. When you've seen Fritz have success at his stops, whether it's Blinn Junior College, Sam Houston State, they had a pretty historic run there for a second. Wherever he's been, they've been able to run the football pretty well. They had a top-end freshman running back, top-end high school recruit that was freshman running back last year in Parker Jenkins. They're also bringing in a handful of transfers, kind of get some thunder and lightning looks along there as well. I think if Houston can play a game control type of run the clock, a lot of counter, keep the ball on the ground, and just keep it away from the defense, I could see this team sneaking out wins that we don't think like the national audience maybe doesn't think they should, right? You could see the same way that no one thought that Tajay Spears was going to beat USC, right? Like those kinds of wins I don't think are super far-fetched for a Willie Fritz coach program, the kind of culture he puts into the program. If it's year one, that would be nice, obviously. But I think there's teams in the Big 12 that are ripe for that right now.
What are your expectations for the Cougars this fall? I think there's still, kind of an adapting and adjusting for transfer portal kids and recruits to get accustomed to the idea that, oh yeah, right, Houston is a Big 12 program and they should be able to, draw this sort of recruit, or whether it's building up their NIL collective or what have you. What are your expectations year one? What is success for Houston this year?
So when I look at their schedule, I think that the key is there's a couple of like non-conference games, your UNLVs, your Rices, that you just got to go win, right? You got to take care of those. They lost to Rice last year, right? I mean, that's improvement in and of itself. And then there are other teams on your schedule that, whether it's last year, it was Baylor and West Virginia, teams kind of at the bottom end of the Big 12 that like there's no reason you can't beat, right? That like, yes, they've had Big 12 resources for a while now, but at the end of the day, truthfully, they've lost to group of 5 teams in the past. There's no reason you can't get out there and compete with them. I say that to say that you very quickly add up to, 4 or 5 wins that you feel like you maybe should have had. Last year, I thought they should have been bowl eligible, honestly, and they end up going 4-8, right? And so I don't think that's an unreasonable expectation to think like this team could get to a 5-win thing. 6 in a bowl game is great. You cover college football every day. I don't need to tell you and your audience, but getting a bowl game in an extra month or 6 weeks of practice is like an unbelievable benefit for the next year's program, right? Like,
especially when you've got a first-year head coach that's trying to build things kind of from the ground up, because Houston football has fallen down from what it's capable of being.
Exactly. And so you think like that's an extra 6 weeks of intentional practice, whether or not you have seniors opt out or whatever, for the program's longevity. I think that's a big, big thing. They do play Oklahoma. I think that's going to be nice for people's feel good if they were to pull that one off. They beat Oklahoma once upon a time, right? Kind of an underdog story a few years back. I just feel like next year's team might still be in a rebuilding mode, not quite there. That's technically a non-conference game, which is weird for Houston to be wearing a Big 12 patch, but Oklahoma to be a non-conference game.
That is a non-conference game. It's as classic an SEC Big 12 matchup as I remember as a young lad growing up with college football. I remember it very well, Parker. Do you not recall the classic showdowns of Cougars and Sooners?
Well, Oklahoma is notably south and east of what, Nebraska? I don't know. No, I think when you factor in like Cincinnati is a program a lot like yourself, like getting acquainted to the Big 12. Why can't you go beat that team? BYU as a program has had some really high highs, but they're also new to the Big 12, and so like those are programs that go up and down. Like
for those on podcasts, I am just going up and down like a roller coaster. That's BYU. BYU's gone up. They've gone down. They were the 2021 Pac-12 South champions, and Well, then there was last year too. That also is the thing that happened.
So you've got those two games, Rice, UNLV. Those are all games I think you can go out and get. And so I'm not afraid to say they should get, up around the 5-win mark. And like I said, 6 is a great goal because of what it means long term.
Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Houston Cougars. Appreciate you keeping us up to date with all things down there in the city of Houston.
Thanks for having us, Spitzer.
What can stop Georgia from making the college football playoff? I don't know. You tell me.